Good evening, good Wednesday. Welcome back to Campaign Live Streams. I'm Casey Whitener, your Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate here in South Carolina. And weekly, we've been doing these 25 to 40-minute live streams, trying to get people engaged with what's going on in the campaign. You'll remember the first series was Not My Circus, Not My Monkeys. It was all about the primaries. Primaries are over. So now we're focused on the national debt, which is the primary issue for my campaign. So this whole series is called Money Doesn't Grow on Trees. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but it may come as a surprise to some people who are now currently using our federal government to do all the things that you might do if money in fact grew on trees. So for tonight's episode, I want to do a quick campaign wrap up or what we've been up to lately and where we're headed in the future. But I'm going to bring my guest in early so he can be part of that too. You guys know him from previous campaign shout outs. This is my good friend, Casey Crowe. Welcome in, Casey Crowe.
Hey, Casey Whitener, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad you're here. So real quick background for these folks so this is our money conversation. Money doesn't grow on trees. You and I have, I would say in like 60 to 80% of our conversations are political conversations, but there's like a good 20 to 40% that are like money conversations where we're talking about investment strategies, real estate, saving, all these kinds of things, the different choices. And some of that comes from being on the radio 100.7 The Point, where I can't remember his name now, but the money guy is on there too. Well, of course, Fran Halloran, the money coach on Thursday mornings, but then also every day in the middle of the day, and it's on right before we get on the air at 4:00.
Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey. Yeah, Dave Ramsey. So that kind of spawned some of those conversations where we're like, what do you think about Dave Ramsey? Like, who turns their own money troubles into this massive empire of teaching other people how to not have money troubles, which is like the most entrepreneurial thing I've ever seen, when entrepreneurs build a business and then they turn around and teach other people how to build businesses. Like, there's just no end to the way that we can, flip around and show people how we got it done. So anyway, and all that to say, you're a perfect guest for the money conversation, but you actually are filling in at the last minute because the other person that I had is associated with a nonprofit and he did not get permission to be able to be on the show, and his boss is out of town. So he was like, I'm sorry, but I can't do it without my boss's permission. So we may have him at a later date, but if not, no worries, because I think both of the things we're going to talk about tonight are specifically in your wheelhouse and your expertise, starting with your long suffering trip through Hampton County. 2 weeks ago, we went out to Hampton County and got to be part of the Watermelon Festival Parade, which, as it turns out, is the longest parade in the state. It's 3.4 miles. And this time we took my Mazda, my little black Mazda Miata, Lizzie, and Charlie drove. It's a stick shift, so doing a stick shift for 3.5 miles at like a snail's pace is kind of challenging too. He might have, built up some calf muscles, but you and Melissa walked it. So you guys get my campaign shout outs for the week because you guys walked the full 3.4 miles. Well, you walked about 3 miles before you jumped on the back of somebody else's float and rode the other half a mile or so.
In fairness, we were running ahead and behind through the
It was so hot, and you guys ran and handed out all the little bubble wands that we gave out, and you handed out postcards, and we had great web traffic after that with a lot of people very curious about what they had received while we were there in Hampton County. And I got to tell you, those people were really sweet. I love Hampton County. I would love to get invited back to Hampton County if any of our Hampton County friends are watching, to actually have some conversations with folks, because they waved at us, they took pictures, they smiled, they said thanks for coming. Like, that was a cool parade. I enjoyed that experience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was very hot. It was longer than I was expecting, but it was great.
It was longer than you and me and Charlie were expecting, but Melissa knew that it was 3.4 miles. She said, it's right there on the website, Casey. Why didn't you?
She just must have just tucked that right under her hat. But totally. It was great because I love the parades, because we get to go and run up to all the families and stuff and hand out bubble wands to the kids, which I love, giving the kids something to do. And when something, one of the boring political floats are going by, that's the boring stuff. So handing out stuff to kids is fantastic, and handing out the cards to voters and stuff is really, really great. So it was just a joy, and meeting people in Hampton. Yeah, it was great.
Gaffney better get ready, because we're coming for the Peach Festival Parade in Gaffney. And this time we have bubble wands for the kids and we have fans for the parents. So we're going to have these Casey fans, because Lord have mercy, it will be hot out there. So we're going to have these to hand out as well. And then we'll have bubbles for the kids. So looking forward to seeing everybody at the Peach Festival in Gaffney next Saturday. Okay, so parade news, that's what we've been doing. I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we did the SC Forum. We were in Charleston. We've been kind of moving around, but with the 4th of July holiday, I stepped back a little bit from campaigning because I don't think people who are having like barbecues and hanging out with their families really want like politicians sneaking up in there being like, hello, I'm here. So instead I was like, you know what, let's just enjoy the 4th with my family, with my friends, and let everybody else do the same. I did post on the 4th of July, there's a blog post up there that talks a little bit about the reverence that I have for the story that we have to tell as an independent country. So I think that was that's up there. That's got some good traction too, if you're interested in reading that. So that's where we're at as far as campaign's concerned. And like I mentioned, we're headed to Gaffney next week for the Peach Festival. So this is Money Doesn't Grow on Trees. And so every week I like to pick out one person who gets the Shill of the Week award. This one was kind of tough because I almost went to Michael Dell and his wife because they're complicit in what's happening here. But what they're doing is philanthropic and it's actually really kind. So instead, I've decided to give the Shill of the Week related to the Trump accounts to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And here's, I don't mean to be derogatory in this. And actually, I know the phrase Shill of the Week is sort of derogatory because it's about somebody who is promoting an investment that usually benefits themselves. But I was thinking about the Hamilton musical line where we have our very first Treasury Secretary, which is Alexander Hamilton. And he's accused of wanting to bring in all of the state's debts associated with the Revolutionary War. He wants to consolidate those so that the nation itself will take on those debts and pay them off. And somebody says, well, that benefits your own seat of government. So what you're trying to do is just to benefit your own seat of government. And I think there's a case to be made that if you expand the United States investment portfolio, which is what the Trump accounts are doing, you are in fact benefiting the very seat of government where Bessent sits. And I think there's something to be said about that. And so I don't know, Case, how much you know about these Trump accounts, but they're basically for babies that were born between 2025 and 2028. They're seed funded with $1,000. The Dells are matching $250. They're putting $250 into accounts for children in specific zip codes. So underprivileged zip codes that they're identifying. Okay. I'm not quite sure how, but they're adding some, it's like 6.2 billion that they've committed to do this. So there's a lot of money there to go to those accounts. And the idea here is that this will, all of this money from the federal treasury will go into a diversified fund that's going to track the S&P 500 so that as U.S. companies do better, this fund does better, ideally. And these young people who have these $1,000, they have up on their website that if you don't put any money into it at all, you just have your original investment in it, that you'll, over time, you'll at some point end up with $15,000. I'm not quite sure how the math's there, but if you do contribute $5,000 a year, which is the maximum contribution per year, you will have up to $13 million by the time you're 55. So there's some kind of math behind that as far as how this investment is meant to pay off. But also your employer can match it. And there are a bunch of employers who've signed up to match for their employees. And also people can gift to it in the same way that you can gift to like future scholar accounts and things like that. But these investment accounts can then be withdrawn for things like education, down payments on homes, those sorts of things. And here's the big thing about this. And this is kind of the point I want to make about it. It's not a bad vehicle, right? Like it's not a bad investment vehicle. It's just like a lot of other tax advantaged accounts that we already have in an overly complicated tax code. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to build another one that kind of does the same thing that all these other ones do, especially knowing that the people who typically benefit from these kinds of tax advantaged accounts are the people who could afford to save for their own retirement anyway. So it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense that we're just kind of giving away all this money and building another tax advantaged account that may not actually benefit the people who are it's supposed to be benefiting anyway. And there's a lot of stuff being written out there about this. You can look them up. If you look up the Trump accounts, there's arguments on one side or the other. But I want to, based on what I've said, I'm going to stop talking, Casey, and let you kind of weigh in on this real quick. And then I'm going to look up like the debt dispatch rejection of this. Go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was my question, was like, why are we doing this when there are other vehicles already in existence? And why do those vehicles have funding limits on them? How come I can only contribute so much to my own retirement? Why is there a cap on that? You know, and so like, but my guess is that all those other vehicles don't have Trump's name on them.
Yeah.
And that is a big part of his administration's, is taking things that already exist and either copying them and putting his name on them, like Trump phones and things like that, or just renaming them. This is probably more of that, and probably an easier way to sidestep having to pass legislation to majorly overhaul the existing, you know, 401k and Roth IRA, simple IRA laws and regulations. So, you know, and also, who doesn't like free money, right? So when Uncle Sugar's got his, you know, got his wallet open, everybody lines up whether they hate you or not. So, you know, is it a popularity grab to try to, you know, bribe people with $1,000 for their kids? Who's to say? But I just think that the government getting into investing for people is not a good idea. I mean, they'll give you projected returns on the S&P, but what if the S&P goes down? Certainly not, you know, out of the question. We've had stock market crashes before, so, you know, like, it's introducing risk for people. And I think that we already have retirement vehicles through the government, you know, in place, called like Social Security, that we should be focusing on that instead of trying to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on in terms of it is sort of redundant in that we already have other vehicles that do something similar to this. This one just has different parameters and, of course, a different name on it. The arguments that I'm reading about it are calling it things like welfare. It is, you know, if you're putting $1,000 away for people with their specific name on it, it's a little bit more specific than waiting for them to need that money and apply for that money and go through government agencies to access that money. But at the same time, if it's not going to present any additional benefits than any other retirement accounts other than the seed fund, which is $1,000, then it's probably not, you know, as beneficial to the individuals it's meaning to benefit as it possibly could be. So on either side, I'm not necessarily, I don't mean to bash the Trump accounts. I mean, there's this is an effort that is being made, I would say, for the most part, in good faith, to like try to create two things. Number one, I think try to go ahead and introduce to people this impetus to save and this impetus to invest in the stock market, which of course benefits the fund that is actually managing this and all and that, but also benefits the stock market as well. But then the other piece of that is that should the government be in the business of doing this? And I think that, you know, from my perspective, we should simplify the tax code, not make it more complicated. And I think I said a couple weeks ago that, look, our tax code, I think the tax code should be to generate revenue so that we can fund the government. Period. End. That's it. The only reason we have taxes would be for that particular purpose. And that's not what our tax code does. Our tax code is marionette strings that tries to get us to behave in certain ways. And this is just another one of those marionette strings, despite how it looks like $1,000 worth of free money. And if you don't touch it for 30 years, you know, maybe it'll be $15,000 worth of free money, but it nevertheless, it's still a marionette string that's trying to get you to save and trying to get you to put your retirement into this one place. Which leads us to our next big conversation, which is about Social Security. Because my question for you on the Trump accounts, what it looked like to me from the very beginning, and this is another one of the maybe critiques or conversations around it, is the beginning of privatizing Social Security. And I wouldn't even go with privatizing because it's still a government vehicle, but I would say taking Social Security and pinning it to a specific Social Security number. And people right now think that that's how Social Security is built, but it's not.
It is not.
Yeah, but it's not. So sorry, we got a couple of comments here in our notes here. I want to ask, why did Trump accounts from only 2025 to 2028? I'm not sure why it's only for those. It says for every kid. Yeah, I don't disagree. I've got an 18-year-old. I would love for her to have $1,000 account. But yeah, there's a, I think there's, for whatever reason, they set some parameters around it, and it may be associated with how much money they decided to use to be able to fund the whole thing. But it said, let's not forget the Republicans excoriated Hillary's $5,000 baby bond idea. She floated in the late 2000s. Trump steals it, and the rhinos fall in line. So thanks, Lee Padgett, for that comment as well. So yeah,
and Cory Booker
a lot of viewers here. Yeah,
Cory
there were
Booker,
a lot of viewers here
for
a minute there. A lot of this is a social safety net kind of program, which is to create a government entity or a government custodian to force people to save or to save on their behalf, because we don't trust that they're going to do it themselves. And that's what Social Security is. It is built to protect people who did not save on their own behalf with government funds. But it's not an account that has your Social Security number on it that holds the money that they took out of your paycheck. That is not how Social Security works. It is a fund as you go program, which means that the money that they're paying out to the one side, which is our elderly people who are claiming Social Security, is coming in from the other side, which is the workers who are currently working. And with a falling birth rate, that means fewer workers, which means we have less money that we're taking out of paychecks. And we have a lot more people aging in to the Social Security eligibility that are claiming those benefits. Plus, the benefits are wage adjusted benefits, meaning that they're going up as wages increase. So people are getting more from Social Security based on wage increases, not based on cost of living increases. The wage increases outpace cost of living. So we're paying out more. And I don't want to say more than we need, because people are going to come and say, I don't get more than I need from Social Security. And I get that. But it's a complex formula that they use to pay out these wages. And we are spending more than we're bringing in on Social Security.
Yeah, when the program was first originated, there were 5 workers to every recipient. And now there is about 2.5 or 2.3, I believe. And it's going to continue to go down if the birth rate continues based on longevity tables. People are living longer. Originally people were passing away earlier. And so, what we have is, I did some looking at before we got on, so I had accurate numbers. We have $30 trillion based on how long people are going to live that we don't have money to pay for. That's a lot. I mean, the debt right now is $39 trillion. And so Social Security remains our number one expense as a government. And there's really not enough people working to make up that shortfall.
So I mentioned before a Substack called Debt Dispatch, DEBT dispatch.substack.com. And this is from the Cato Institute, a woman named Romina Boccia, who has, I probably said her last name wrong, but she's dedicated her professional career to tracking Social Security and to writing about Social Security. And I'm in the middle of reading her book that she wrote about reforming Social Security. And so a couple of things that she mentioned that I read today was talking about the way our retirement is structured. There's like 4 pillars of retirement. And one of those pillars is our private retirement investments. And one of the things I thought was really surprising was she said 56% of Americans participate in employer-sponsored retirement accounts, 56%. And so that's actually a much higher percentage than I thought it was going to be, because we keep hearing about so many people who don't have retirement savings, but 56% is a pretty high amount. And then she said 25% of households own IRAs, which are the independent retirement accounts in addition to your employer account. And so that basically makes up about 73% of the needed retirement funds are out there. They're being held, they're growing. People are responsibly taking advantage of that, which means that it's not quite as many people as we think that for whom Social Security is their primary source of income. But she said that in addition to that, 76% of seniors own their own homes, and 31% of seniors receive income from something other than government programs. So we can see that when we start thinking about, okay, who's actually retired and what income are they actually receiving, we're way better off than the global average, which is like 55% in global circles are saving for their own retirement, and we're at like 73%. But we still have a high percentage of our seniors that are depending on those government programs. Then she talked about Social Security being broken into multiple pieces. Only one of them is that payroll tax that then comes back in Social Security benefits. Another is actually Social Security insurance, which is also being claimed. And so there are multiple sort of funding mechanisms inside Social Security, which is what makes it such a complicated program and such a complex program, and such a difficult problem to solve when we think about how much it's outpacing our ability to be able to pay for it.
Yeah, it's, people have been saying that it's going to be a problem since, as far back as I can remember being a teenager or something in the 90s.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, oh, that's so far away, or that's what they always say, everything's still fine or whatever. But it's only gotten worse, and we've only gotten closer to where, the Social Security Administration, the Board of Trustees itself is already talking about it being insolvent, where we're going to have the same money coming in as we are going out. There's going to be no surplus that gets reinvested into treasuries that, where we've historically, reaped that interest, basically. That's going to go away. So something has to be done about it, or, we're going to be forced down a road where we have fewer options left to us as a country.
The latest deadline that they're giving us is 2033. And it's probably important that people understand what happens in 2033. There is codified into law, a couple of really important things related to Social Security. The first is that the government has to pay Social Security before it pays anything else. Congress is required to fund that. It is by law, they have got to pay for that. This is where we get into this conversation around entitlements and the reason they call them entitlement programs. I think that's a lightning rod word. I wouldn't use that particular word for it, but basically by law, our government has to pay these benefits. That's the law that's written is for Social Security. And so that's where our lawmakers, they'll say things like, oh, my hands are tied. There's not a whole lot I can do about this, like by law. But the other part of that is because it's eating up so much of our budget, and it has to get paid first. The only way people are looking at this is looking around going, well, we've got to raise more money. And that, of course, means raising taxes. So they also don't want to have that conversation about how do we generate more revenue for this. So that's part of it. The other piece that the law is that by 2033, if they don't fix this, then they're automatically going to slash benefits for everybody. And the idea of that was they knew that they were going to run out of this surplus that they were using to sort of debt finance. They were going to run out of that. And so they said, well, let's make sure that we do something about this by this deadline. And as you might imagine, they're pretty much waiting to the very last minute to have to do anything about it, even though I'm encouraged to see how many people are talking about it. The minute you get into this space and you start asking questions about it, there are some really smart people in this space that are doing really good work talking about this. And so I think, one of the best suggestions I saw was to form one of those the short-term committees. They're called BRACs, that they put together when they were closing the bases, where it was a nonpartisan, a group of people that gets together, they investigate, here's what we need to do. They make those recommendations, and Congress just says, okay, yes, we just have to do these things. This is how we're going to fix it. I think a BRAC could make this happen. I think if we got really serious about putting together, but it's going to be about negotiating, and there's going to be some, things like talking about raising the retirement age. I think you mentioned when it first got built, Social Security was for folks that were 65 and older. And at the time, 65 was 3 years beyond life expectancy. And now life expectancy is 77. So we're not even holding them to life expectancy, let alone beyond life expectancy. And so those kinds of questions about raising the retirement age, and then also reducing benefits. And then there's been some conversation around right now, Social Security taxes only come out to about $165,000 of your annual salary. Like if you're earning over 165, you don't pay percentage wise on that, anything that's over 165. So there's been a lot of conversation. This is that tax the billionaire crowd where they're like, oh, you should raise that and start taxing them at higher. You know what I mean? They're making more than 165. They're probably saving for their own retirement. They don't need Social Security anyway. Okay, so tax the billionaire crowd. Let's not talk about, like, that's not going to fix this. You can't just, try to bring in more money from the wealthy. That's not going to do it. So anyway, all that to say, there's a bunch of opportunities here if we get serious about having the conversation and we get serious about saying we've got to fix this, we've got to reform this, and commit to doing so. But so far, I haven't seen anybody but scholars committed to doing so. I've not seen a single politician committed to fixing Social Security, maybe with the exception of some errant tweets from Rand Paul's camp, because he is a budget hawk. But other than that, I haven't seen a whole lot of people that are dedicated to it.
Yeah, it's, they've always called it the third rail of politics for a reason. Anybody that touches it gets shocked because, the older generation, they all vote and, they're looking at Social Security or they're on Social Security. So it's really unpopular to start talking about taking it away, even if you're talking about taking it away, for younger people and making a change. And, to me, I think of it like the Titanic. The Titanic, all of a sudden, out of the darkness comes this, iceberg. Imagine if the Titanic had 3 days, knowing that, by the way, in 3 days' time, there's going to be an iceberg. And nobody wanted to change course. Nobody wanted to really address it and go, guys, and meanwhile, there's somebody going, there's 3 days, guys. And okay, there's 2 days. Okay, there's 1 day, and then all of a sudden it's yank the wheel and, try to save the ship. And what happens to the ship? It goes down. And when we get to that reckoning, it's not gonna be pretty for our country's seniors, So who have been relying on that.
There's a few sort of phrases that I keep hearing. Well, it was my money and I deserve to have it back. Turns out the Supreme Court said that's not true. So, so those of you who are thinking I paid into Social Security, therefore it's mine, I should get it back. There's a Supreme Court ruling that says no, that's just not the case. And so whatever it is you are receiving from Social Security, you should consider it the benefit that it actually is. It is not your money that you're receiving back it is not that. Yeah. It is in fact a program that you supported for the people who were working while you were working, right? The people who were retired while you were working. And now you are retired and you're being supported by it by the people who are currently working. It is a benefit. So I want to be really clear about that. And then the other thing we hear a good bit about is that reforms have got to be immediate and they've got to be austerity measures. And that's also not really true. We can really start by just slowing the growth of Social Security, just by putting the brakes on. We don't have to chop it in half, dissolve it, throw water on the Wicked Witch of the West. We don't have to do any of those things. We can just slow the growth of it, and that will make a measurable impact. And so there are ways to measure our way through this over time. And I think we can fix it. I think it's just going to take the political will to be able to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And really that means getting young people involved and educating them and letting them know that, like, this is your future and you can either do nothing and pay into it and get nothing, or you can get involved and maybe not pay, 12.6% of your income towards this program and then wind up with empty pockets when it comes time for you to retire. I'm 46, so I've got almost 20 years, 22 years, something like that. And, ain't no way. None of that's going to be there for me. So,
well, I think I pretty much knew from the 90s that wasn't going to be there for me. So I'm always really surprised by my Gen X colleagues and friends that are like, well, that's my money. I'm like, but it's not. And it never has been.
Nope, not a savings account.
This was not a savings account that they put the money in for you and then it was waiting for you when you get there. That doesn't mean it can't be. And I want to make that point too, is that if we decide as a nation that we believe that the government should in fact have a pension plan for all of us, right? And that seems to be this Trump account scenario, right? Is the idea of that. If we believe that, then we have to create a program that is sustainable, that is affordable, and one that everybody can participate in. It shouldn't have these kinds of rules and regulations and administrative nightmares that exclude anybody. We either decide that's something worth doing and it's worth doing for everybody, or we decide we don't want to do it. But this sort of hybrid model that we have right now, which is we're kind of doing it for some people, but not for everybody. And some people pay, but other people don't. And some people who paid didn't get paid. Like, this craziness has got to stop. It's got to stop. So one more book recommendation or shout out for Romina's book, Reimagining Social Security is the name of that book. You can go in and find Reimagining Social Security. And I'm reading it right now to try to get my arms around this just a little bit better. But I just think the most important thing is to be talking about it and asking questions about it. And don't be afraid. I mean, I'm not even 50 yet. So I've got, at least 20 more years of work ahead of me to start building my retirement out the way I want it to look, knowing that Social Security won't be there for me. And so I think that it should just be sort of a call to action for all of us who are under that retirement age to start putting, maybe being a little bit more aggressive with our own retirement savings. That said, we also have to address the national debt because inflation is eroding our retirement savings. Anything we put into savings, as the value of our dollar goes down, our savings aren't going to be there for us either. So, but that is a topic for another live stream. Thank you, Casey, for being here and just letting me sort of monologue at you.
Thanks for having me. As you were talking, I just will be quick. It occurred to me that there's a unintended consequence and perverse incentive for companies to be into the S&P 500 and be subsidized if the Trump accounts are going to be investing in an S&P 500 index fund. So now suddenly you have companies that may otherwise not be profitable be receiving money through these Trump accounts because that's where they're invested, just as a law or a rule, rather than an investment advisor being careful and being a fiduciary for you, right? So now you have companies that are going to be once again buoyed up by the taxpayer instead of being left to the market to survive and thrive on their own.
And once again, seeing government choosing winners and losers.
And losers.
By pinning this to the S&P 500, not the Dow Jones Industrial Average, not the NASDAQ, not any of these other big indices. So that's a question to be sort of bandied about as well, which is, when we start asking our government to do more than it should actually be doing, how does it make those choices? And I went in a little bit of a rabbit hole looking for like who's going to be the custodian of this fund. It's a organization called State Street Investment Firm, and so who are they and how did they win this bid and all that sort of thing. Turns out this was a smart choice. It's the least expensive fund to be invested in, but all it said was it was like the lowest bidder. You know what I mean? So I'm like, okay, that doesn't make it free. But anyway, all right. Well, we're going to keep talking about this. We're going to keep talking about money doesn't grow on trees. Next week, we're going to have Bill Hawk in here. He is an economist at the University of South Carolina. We're going to talk about tariffs and why tariffs can't get us out of the national debt, and some of these other things that are sort of money myths that are out there that are being talked about but not necessarily questioned. And I want to get into those talking points that people are using to try to shift conversations away from the reality of economics. So thank you, Casey, for being here and for being part of what I'm doing on the campaign. Again, campaign shout out to you and Melissa for your walking the 3.4 miles that they have 10 watermelon parade.
I was going to say, I'm your ride or die, but I'm your walk or die. So sometimes both.
Yeah, 100%. I can only pay you in margaritas, which I'm glad to do.
I'll take
and then the other thing, two real quick announcements for everybody that's going to be following the campaign. This Saturday at Beef O'Brady's on Hardscrabble Road, we have our state committee meeting for the South Carolina Libertarian Party. You're welcome to come and observe that. But afterwards, I'm going to hold an Ask Me Anything. So anybody who wants to be there and hang out with me, we're just going to talk and have an open dialogue and probably a few beers because I haven't been to Beef O'Brady's where I haven't had a beer before. So So we'll do that on Saturday afternoon. I'll make sure that gets posted on my social so you can see that. And then next week we'll be in Gaffney. Can't wait to get up to Cherokee County and be part of the Peach Festival up in Gaffney. So thank you, Andrew Strait and the Cherokee County SCLP, for inviting me to be part of that. Thanks, everybody. This has been Money Doesn't Grow on Trees, and that will end our Wednesday night. Y'all have a great night.